This podcast is supported by Anthropic, the public benefit corporation behind Claude. Everyone's got a hard question about AI. Your job, your kids, where it's going. Anthropic was built to surface those questions and share what it finds along the way, because there's hope in hard questions. Ask yours at claude.ai/Spotify and keep thinking. That's claude.ai/Spotify.
I've been in this library for 6 hours. I'm out of snacks and energy. Plus, I just realized I forgot to put deodorant on.
Oh, girl, you're a mess. Let's run to Target.
Let's RTT.
We'll grab some protein chips, body spray, and deodorant.
And we get 20% off with Target Circle so we can get those great face masks for our self-care Sundays.
I love an SCS.
Let's get out of here.
College students get 20% off their next purchase with Target Circle. Subject to terms. Visit target.com/circle for more details.
The most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life we didn't go to town that much, but when I would go to see her because she had these long red fingernails, she wore bright lipstick, she had peroxide blonde hair, wore tight clothes, short, and I thought she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And my mother said, "Oh, she's just trash. She's just a tramp." And I thought, that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Quiet Riot. Welcome to Quiet Riot B-Side, the track that sits just off the Thursday headline, where we can slow things down and listen a little more closely. I'm Naomi.
And I'm Alex, the audiophile of the trio, who knows all too well that the best tracks are often hidden on the other side.
And I'm Kenny, here to make sure that no one sounds too much like a stuck record.
Before we begin today's show, we wanted to start by sending our thoughts to everyone affected by the utterly devastating floods in Nepal. We'll leave a link in the show notes to the Red Cross, who are being deployed to undertake search and rescue efforts in affected areas.
Now, yesterday we talked to foreign policy expert Arthur Snell about the latest in Iran, as well as the most recent threats from Moscow on UK military bases supporting Ukraine.
Today, we plan to get into media consumption, how it's changing, why print may not yet be dead, and Cooler Heads has some experience of this next bit, just how difficult and yet fun it can be to get a new media company off the ground.
And our guest today is on a bit of a mission. Cal Roscow is, full disclosure, a friend and colleague, but also the founder and editor-in-chief of Paperweight, a brand new magazine that describes itself as being for people who are fed up with the way things are, but who still have the curiosity to imagine them completely differently. Welcome to the show, Cal.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, I have a question for all of you, seeing as the gay men are 50-50 today. I was quite struck by the fond farewell to legend Dolly Parton on the front page of every single newspaper on Wednesday. And I wanted to ask, considering the current media and political environment, is Dolly Parton the last person that everyone liked?
Well, it's undeniable that everybody liked her. I mean, if you think back to when she was at Glastonbury, I think anyone else performing on another stage would have been bitterly disappointed to have been scheduled at the same time. It was absolutely everybody on one stage. I think it's probably easy to think that might not be possible again, but even 20 years ago, I think she may have been an exception, just because of the way she conducted herself, all of the huge variety of things she did, her true philanthropy and giving away much more of her money than almost anyone else. So it might just be Dolly specific.
I know, and she is such a shining example that you can be rich and good and do good. And I feel like at the moment, very, very few billionaires seem to be doing anything close to the good work that she did. I think to answer your question directly, and I do think this one stands up globally, though obviously much more pertinently in the UK, we do have another very old, aged superstar in David Attenborough. So I think that could also be one that will dominate every front page when the inevitable eventually happens.
But don't you think there are segments, even if they're keeping quiet, that consider him a bit woke and part of the environmental movement and the net zero stuff, that don't adore him in a way that the right and left and everyone seems to just love Dolly Parton?
I scribbled down that Dolly Parton might have been the first and last person that everybody ever liked. With that very thought in mind, actually, that no matter how wonderful and cuddly and how much of a national treasure somebody is, there always seems to be a group somewhere that are willing to have a downer on them. But Dolly managed to do something very unusual. I mean, she even managed to get people to like her who might have been, well, they might have been down on the gays, for example. And yet, she managed to transcend all of that stuff in a way that I don't think anybody else ever has. She's a proper loss, isn't she?
Yeah, I think so. And I think everyone sort of felt it. The other thing that I find quite strange is that, I was looking at loads of videos and interviews trying to get a quote for the top of the show. And I had thought going into them that she would be the sort of person that has a routine, that has, amusing stories that she recycles. And I was very surprised that all of it seemed to be off the cuff and none of it was replicated. I didn't hear the same joke twice. I didn't hear the same story twice. And I thought that was quite extraordinary, actually. So on top of being a fantastic songwriter and a singer, an icon and a philanthropist, I think she was also quite a Peter Ustinov style storyteller.
And as if we hadn't suffered enough, we then had the very sad news that Tim Curry passed away as well. And I wondered if any of you were big Rocky Horror Picture Show fans.
Oh, yeah. I got stopped by the police at university. Alistair, if you're listening, you'll remember that we were walking through Aberdeen and a police car pulled up the window one time and a policewoman that looked at Alistair and said, "Nice legs, son." And then drove on.
Which one of the two of you, or were you both Frankenfurters?
No, I had no idea what I was getting into, so I was rocking up as some sort of faux Dracula character as an excuse to wear some Ray-Bans. And Al had he dressed up in the full sussies, and he was quite tall with thin legs. He looked like he was not a stranger to walking the streets in suspenders, I must say.
I was never a big Rocky Horror Picture Show fan, but I was a huge fan of two performances in two films, both released in 1985, weirdly, and couldn't be more different. So in one, in Legend, he plays Darkness, which has become just the quintessential portrayal of sort of the devil, the demon antagonist, that sort of innocence, very deep voice that he gave it. And the same year, he released a much underrated film, I think, called Clue, with an absolutely stellar cast that is basically the game Cluedo being played out, a sort of Mickey take of Agatha Christie, and he was playing the butler, Wadsworth. And he was just brilliant in both of them. Two such different performances. In one, this sort of American accented hellish demon type creature, and in the other, a very British butler type person in a farce.
His flexibility was amazing because he played Pennywise in the original version, the
True.
TV version. Yeah, he was stupendous. My favourite iteration of Tim Curry, though, might chime with you, Alex, because it was in a video game. It wasn't in a movie. And in, it must be 15 years ago, he played a Russian military leader in Command and Conquer 3. It's a video game that I spent many hours on my PS3 playing. And there's one bit, and it went viral, and he's got a quote where he says, "I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism, space." But it's so OTT, and he's practically corpsing when he gets that punchline space out as well. And it was so irresistible that the game producers went with it, and apparently it was quite an early take as well. It was just nobody but Tim Rice could have Tim Curry and Rice, anyone?
He had a staggeringly sort of broad fan base in terms of age, because for people my age, when we were kids, he was in a lot of films at that time. I mean, not necessarily some of the best films, but a lot of kids' films. So people remembered him fondly. And I think when you got into the 2000s, there was that sort of emo indie revival, which brought Rocky Horror right back into sort of the cultural zeitgeist. And I remember going to parties where everybody was doing the time warp in like 2006, which is sort of fascinating. So, much loved across so many ages.
I completely agree. And the favourite children's film of mine that he was in was the adaptation of the book by Jill Murphy, The Worst Witch, where he played the Grand High Wizard, and you had Diana Rigg in it. It was a real all-star cast with brilliant songs, and I knew every word off by heart.
And Annie, of course, he plays the Miss Hannigan's brother.
Yeah.
he does an extraordinary dance routine up and down a staircase in that. So goodbye to just incredible legends, really.
Quiet Riot. This podcast is supported by Anthropic, the public benefit corporation behind Claude. Everyone's got a hard question about AI. Your job, your kids, where it's going. Anthropic was built to surface those questions and share what it finds along the way, because there's hope in hard questions. Ask yours at claude.ai/Spotify and keep thinking. That's claude.ai/Spotify. Quiet Riot.
Cal's magazine Paperweight launched online with a plan to move into 6 print editions a year, and its whole pitch is that it refuses to pick a lane. Serious reporting on housing or the railways sits right alongside restaurant reviews, travel, theatre, and nightlife for what Cal rather brilliantly calls the nerdy but Epicurean reader. It arrives at an interesting moment. We're told the internet is in the grip of what Cory Doctorow calls enshittification. AI slop is everywhere, and yet, counterintuitively, print seems to be having a little resurgence, with a growing share of Gen Z now calling themselves readers. So there's a lot to get into. Why a magazine? Why now? Why print? And whether it's really possible to make British public life feel a bit, well, nicer. Cal, I'm going to start with the obvious one. You're in your mid-30s, and as you write in your first editor's letter, statistically, that means you were supposed to start a podcast, and instead you started a magazine. So tell us why, and whether there was a particular moment you decided that this was the thing.
To be honest, I think it all started in the middle of last year. I had been doing some research onto political communication on the internet, and I'd spent a huge amount of time looking at a screen, whether that was at home on my phone or throughout the research or even at work. And I was just completely fed up, and I felt sort of burnt out by the internet, and it was such an unpleasant place to be, particularly X, which I know a lot of us have to use for our work. And so I thought, right, I've had enough of this. I'm going to go out and try and get hold of some print material. I'm going to find a newspaper, find some magazines. And actually, I went to the newsagent, or what I thought was the newsagent, just down the road from my house. And I went in there and I couldn't find anything. I thought, okay, that's odd. And so I went up to them and I said, sorry, where are the newspapers and the magazines? And they said, oh, we haven't sold those since 2020, really. And I was a
Wow,
bit embarrassed.
pre-COVID.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a shop that I've been into for chocolate or the occasional maybe late night packet of cigarettes after you've had too much to drink at the pub. But I had not noticed. And I thought, oh gosh, okay, right. That's what. So I persevered. I thought, no, I'm not going to give up. And so I went to another shop and did find some. And I spent the weekend not looking at my phone at all. I picked up a variety of different newspapers and some magazines. And to be honest, what struck me was just how much better I felt immediately. After
Really?
an hour of sitting reading a newspaper or something in print, I felt so much more informed about the world and everything that had gone on.
Well, even
in
though
the last
you
few
were
days.
reading the same content as you had read online, say on Guardian website, having a physical paper.
Look, my day is filled with spending huge amounts of time consuming online news.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And there were so many things that I would never have read, either because they didn't pop up on Instagram or any other social media platform, or they weren't particularly relevant to why I was looking at the Guardian or the Times website for work. And the breadth of subjects, if you sit and just read a few pages, you encounter so many more stories that algorithmically have probably been determined that you're maybe not that interested in, although you probably are.
I find I remember things completely differently and infinitely better if I've read them in physical form. If I'm interviewing someone in a book, I always ask the publisher for a physical review copy, because I find that if I'm scrolling through a screen because they've sent me a PDF or something, I can't locate the bit that jumped out at me in my head. And I didn't know I did that. It was only because I did a few interviews and I found PDFs very difficult to work with. And so when I went back to doing it from a book, I realized that I remember where things are on the page, that it was, a small paragraph
more
on
of
the
a
bottom
photographic
right
memory. Yeah.
hand side. And it was really important to me. So maybe it's to do with my learning style. Maybe it's not the same for everyone, but for me,
No,
a
I think
physical
it
object.
is, Alex, because
Mm,
I now forget that I've read a book because I have them on my Kindle, and I just don't have that visible reminder of the title of the book and the author's name
mm.
on my bedside table in the way that I did in years
That's
before.
true.
And I'll
That's
find
true.
myself going to download a book, and it goes, "You've already got it," and I've already read it. And also, when I'm trying to commit something to memory, I have to write it with a pen and paper. If I type
Yeah.
a speech, it won't go into my head in the way physically writing it down on cue cards that I then don't need to look at. Cal, your mission line is, and I'm quoting from your editor's letter here, the curiosity to dream that greater things are possible. And you land on the word greater rather than the word nice, which you say English teachers train out of us. So just talk us through that thinking a little bit. And what does a magazine built around wanting things to simply be nicer actually look like when they're translated onto a page?
The word nice is a really tricky one because it's much vilified. And even the concept of niceness is something that we shy away from. It doesn't seem very serious. I suppose there's a partial defeat in the choice to use the word greater in quite a lot of the ways to describe it, to not put too many people off. But I mean, I think in that letter that you've probably read, one example that I gave was when you're in Japan, particularly in Tokyo, but everywhere, the fact that each station has got its own piece of music composed specifically for that place. Yes, it serves a function. It's a sort of safety feature, indicates when a train is going to be departing. But that existed before, and a decision was taken that actually, why not make this a pleasant environment and make that sound nice? And there are a couple of composers, but there's a particularly famous composer, and he does most of them. And the sole purpose is so that it sounds good.
And your commute becomes something that's slightly more joyous than the daily drudgery would make it.
And if you imagine if Transport for London or Transport for for Greater Manchester decided to spend any money on doing something like that, the first question that everybody would ask would be, how much is that going to cost? And this is the sort of mindset. Arguably, we would like stations and our commute and going about our day to be a lot nicer. We would all like that. A lot of the time we think it's not nice enough. But if anybody tries to propose anything like that, we have this really bad culture of, first of all, using cost as some reason not to do something. The cost of doing something like this for an organisation as large as Transport for London or any transport provider would be completely negligible. But it is the overall attitude results in things not happening. And it's not just more frivolous things like that. It carries over into all policy areas. And there's such a narrowness of imagination in the UK, in particular, that I think is really holding us back. And Paperweight is a magazine for people who are quite fed up with the way things are, which I appreciate could be almost anybody in the country at the moment. There's such a sense of despair about things. But hopefully, putting some of these ideas onto paper, bringing some really interesting contributors who are not afraid to have these conversations in a relatively safe environment, a community of readers and contributors who all think the same way, we can start to expand the imagination of the public sphere a little bit. We're told that we can't build affordable houses at the moment. In fact, we're told that we can't build a lot of houses even if they're not affordable because, well, for various different reasons. And rather than go, okay, well, should we try and really think about what those reasons are and imagine all of the different ways that we could do those, a lot of the conversation is focused on the fact that we just can't. And people exist, humans exist, the natural resources to make all of the materials that build these homes exist. And so there is something getting in the way. And it's not just that. I also find the constant conversation about, or from campaign groups about changing the rate of VAT on something that will suddenly magically fix a problem, I think really demonstrates just how little imagination there is. We've got quite a lot of ideas and we've got a really good lineup of contributors that will be rolling out in September. We only soft launched just 5 weeks ago and the response has been really huge. I'm delighted with how many people have seen the mission, seen some of the early articles and decided to subscribe. And we've been inundated, certainly in the last 2 weeks, with people who want to contribute something. And we're trying to be a bit open-minded about what that will be. If somebody is particularly passionate about something, even if it might be quite dull, I think if somebody's really interested in something, they can usually write an interesting story about it. And so, as you said, Naomi, nerdy but Epicurean is certainly the theme that runs throughout it.
Quiet, Riot. This podcast is supported by Anthropic, the public benefit corporation behind Claude. Everyone's got a hard question about AI. Your job, your kids, where it's going. Anthropic was built to surface those questions and share what it finds along the way, because there's hope in hard questions. Ask yours at claude.ai/Spotify and keep thinking. That's claude.ai/Spotify.
Riot. So I'm happy to be here, which is terrible, really, because I sort of made a name for myself not being happy about anything. And in the last sort of year or so, I've become happier. And it's very dangerous. It's really bad news, because obviously they're happy. And I speak to you safe in the knowledge you're not happy, or you wouldn't be here, would you? Let's be honest. If you were happy, you wouldn't have paid for someone else to make you laugh, would you? No, you've come out because you're miserable, and the only assumption you've made is that I'm more miserable than you are, and so you'll leave feeling better about yourselves. Because I have a shitter life than you do. That's why you've come here. And since I've become happy, my worry is that I can tell I'm becoming boring. I'm becoming much less interesting. Even my dreams now are so dull. I used to have dreams where spiders fell off ceilings and turned into dogs and bit me. And here's a dream I had recently. See if you can work out what's going on here. I had a dream. I went back to a house I used to live in and tidied the loft. Mysterious subconscious, that, isn't it? What do you do at night time, John? Admin from the past.
Cal, do you think the left, broadly speaking, progressives, liberals, use whatever inaccurate group term you want, but do you think we have effectively surrendered the entire emotional vocabulary for joy? And if so, is a change of adjective really enough to win it back, to say we can talk about things that make life nicer, not just better?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that the progressive left, liberals, anybody sort of on that side of the political debate, I think as a whole, we are quite bad at this. One example is over the summer, The Spectator magazine was hosting its party and frankly just uploaded a whole load of pictures of champagne being delivered and all of these, other scenes of people really enjoying themselves. That content performed really well with the target audience. But it's difficult to imagine sort of a left-leaning title doing the same. They'd be very concerned about how it looks. And look, don't get me wrong. I think when we've got so many people relying on food banks and so many other people really struggling, these things can very easily leave a bad taste in the mouth. But it's not even just the joy or the niceness. I think a lot of the time the left or the progressives like to have their conversations in quite serious places, which really limits how much we can break out of people who are already converted to this way of thinking. Over the summer last year, I did some research into the way both left and right influencers, although there's far more right-wing influencers, use Twitch gaming streams to talk about politics, and the sort of sandwiching effect of, you might have somebody talking about Fortnite for an hour, then they'll do in the same way that they would bring in the games console, they bring in CNN and Fox News and talk about politics, and a lot of them are really in favor of Trump. And you've captured that audience who were actually really there for talking about Fortnite, the game, and now are suddenly able to talk to them about right-wing politics or those right-wing.
And so they see that as part of what it is to be in their tribe. It kind of extends into that area. Wait, Cal, can I prod that a little bit? Because so I've looked at a little bit of research, and there are some quite weird, counterintuitive things. So yes, liberals, I think, are more unhappy than right-wingers on the whole, on an individual level. But liberal-leaning countries are happier than right-leaning countries on a collective level, which is one strange paradox. And then the second one, I think this was the case maybe 10 years ago, and we're maybe stuck a little bit with talking about it in those terms. But right now, the right wing seems to me to be as unhappy and as furious as the left. Every article, every expression is about outrage and livid and angry. And so is that performative? Because the people who I meet who have been, I don't want to say radicalized, but certainly co-opted by that right-wing space online, seem to me quite unhappy, actually.
I think it's a really good question, and I'm not sure that anybody could answer it. Let's look at some of the big examples. Do we really know whether Elon Musk actually wants to put out this information and skew this worldview, or is he in part a victim of it? Like, and this algorithm that's been built is making him spend all of his time looking at content that reinforces the view that he's come to. I certainly found that when I was having to do more research and spend more time on right-wing Twitch streams and anything else, I had to do a lot of fact-checking because it was a barrage of information. Oh, this happened. And you go, oh God, actually, is that, it made me question myself. Now, I've obviously got the energy to go in and do some research and find out what the real story about something might be. Most people, understandably, they don't. So there is every possibility that actually we're ending up with neither side of the political debate being too happy. I certainly think the overwhelming majority of people who are spending lots of time on the internet are deeply unhappy. And we're getting to a point where it's really difficult to know who's actually in control. I worry that it's a bit of a runaway train, and the right may have lost control of a lot of the narratives they started. I mean, looking at Reform UK and Nigel Farage, a lot of their supporters are now moving on, seeking sanctuary in Rupert Lowe's party because it's outrun them. I would find it difficult to decide who was in control and putting out this kind of content and who was a victim of it.
You touch on something very important there, Cal, because as editor-in-chief, you're in control. And there's a huge difference in what you're doing with Paperweight compared with any social media. In fact, compared with any online media at all. Online media really exists to please an audience of one. That's how the algorithms work. They could be tweaked to feed biased information, of course, but ultimately they are aiming for an audience of one. Whereas you, as a human being, you're for the many, not the one. Do you ever feel drunk on power? Because you can, you don't have to chase
yes,
that one
he does.
person.
Not just
all the time.
Do you ever feel sober?
It absolutely has crossed my mind. And on that, I mean, I'm really hoping that with the increase in subscribers and anything else, we'll be able to hire an even bigger team of people to bounce ideas off. I certainly don't really want that control. But I mean, there is certainly a big difference between the way titles that are focusing on print and titles that are focusing online are behaving. When I was deciding which newspaper I might like to spend Saturday morning in bed with, what was really striking was how many of the articles that went online and were certainly served up and even served up to me on Instagram or other platforms didn't make it into the print edition. Because once somebody's bought the newspaper, you've got their attention, they've paid for the newspaper, the job is done, and you can actually just focus a little bit more on informing them. Whereas if it's online, you need to constantly try to get as many clicks as possible and get people to come back, and they're unlikely to spend an entire hour just on your one website. And that's what we've seen with very unfortunate news stories recently. Jason Arday, the fact that Harry and Meghan, almost every news article online is mentioning Harry and Meghan just because they know that that's what will perform and that's what you've got to do for online. So it is nice to not have to consider that strategy. AI is changing things. I know that Reach is even deciding to make it or ask its journalists not to do quite so much clickbait and focus on quality, which is a really, really good sign. But yes, the nice thing about putting together a magazine is that you can decide, well, okay, do I think people would actually enjoy this?
Well, can I ask you about that, Cal? Because I want to know about the target audience here. You talk about people who cycle to work, but also own a car. I mean, I feel extremely seen when I read that sentence from you. And we're people who are as likely to be found very sloshed in a quite expensive late night bar as we are in a museum about railways, right? So did you have a specific reader in mind, or have you just written this for me?
Yeah, I mean,
or indeed be found drunk in a museum. But
precisely. So, I mean, and perhaps this is exactly the sort of thing we're going to accidentally encourage. No, look, when I set about this, I obviously had ideas of what I wanted to achieve and having those kind of conversations about the public sphere. But I also knew that I was like, well, I quite like going to the theatre. I like going out. I like doing things. A lot of people I know like all of that too. They're desperately worried about the serious issues of the day, but they also really like to enjoy their lives. And I went to an event that was organised by the British Society of Magazine Editors, and it was talking about setting up independent publications. And the consensus there was that it really does help if you are quite familiar with your audience and your audience includes you. And so I thought, well, okay, why don't I try and do some maths and work out exactly how many other people there might be like me. And so, look, I'm a millennial. I was born towards the end of the 80s. I think that we are quite a strange generation. We remember the old media regime, but are very familiar with the new one on the internet. We have sort of we've witnessed all of this huge change, and are the last generation that remembers when things weren't quite so, or didn't feel quite so crazy. So I started Paperweight knowing that I was certainly very much part of the audience. On the point about cycling and driving, I think a lot when I meet other people of a similar age, I am always struck by how often they are feeling like they have to tailor what they're saying to sort of fit into the idea of how they should be as a progressive, which is quite strange. Like the number of people, when I said that I wanted to put car reviews and sort of bits about cycling routes that might be nice to do on a weekend, or walking routes, admitted to me for the first time ever that they have a car parked outside, because they feel that, or they thought that I would think that they were really right wing for quite liking driving and quite liking cycling. And I suddenly realized this was a huge number of people, and I don't think just in London, this is people all over the UK. And it's a very small example of that demonstrates the kind of environment we found ourselves in. There's a sort of purity on the progressive left that in lots of cases is good. It means that we are always looking to fight social justice battles. And there are lots, it's not all bad, but it possibly limits the scope of imagination for coming up with real problems for these things. One example, I don't know, are any of you familiar with Cycling Mikey? He's the guy who wears a headcam when he's
Tell us
cycling.
about him, yeah.
Yeah, so he uploads those videos, usually of drivers on their phones while he's filtering through traffic and anything else. And so he became quite famous for sharing this. Lots of people who identify as a cyclist are going, yes, this is right. Lots of people who identify as a motorist were furious. And lots of the newspapers, more right-leaning newspapers, were painting him as a particular type of person who was the angry cyclist, who's probably very woke and anything else. And I did a little bit of digging and found that Cycling Mikey, who's arguably done lots of good things for cycling, is a massive car enthusiast. And you wouldn't know that at all. You wouldn't know that at all from any of the news coverage about him. And so I thought, right, well, I don't really think that we need to choose quite as much. And certainly when in Paperweight, I really want relatively serious current affairs matters to sit in the middle of restaurant reviews and other things. And we're doing this feature, which is an ongoing feature about set menus at very high-end restaurants that are around 30 quid at that more affordable level. So that is all sitting there together. There's an important reason for doing that. Nigel Farage and the right will appear on YouTube channels and speak or do interviews for other publications that mix these lifestyle elements and in lots of cases don't purport to be political at all. And on the face of it, Paperweight is not a political magazine. It is a lifestyle magazine, largely for millennials, but it covers political issues. When Nigel Farage goes on a YouTube channel that is talking about how to become a buy-to-let landlord, it's very well targeted to the kind of voters they think they will get at. But those people aren't necessarily going there for a political message. They might not think that they've received a political message. So I think there is a real value in having places that are quite enjoyable to spend time. You go, okay, actually, I'm really interested in this particular holiday destination. Oh, and this is really interesting housing development. And so my hope was to combine the two. When you ask people, actually, they're interested in all of these things.
Riot. I'm fascinated by some things I've been reading that younger generations, Gen Z in particular, are leaning more into the printed media in ways that are, I think, probably reminiscent of the way vinyl LPs came back, and indeed cassette players are now coming back as well. When you were doing your research, did you come across any sort of specific data that might have hinted that actually Gen Z are adopting a much more dead tree friendly approach than the generations that went before them?
I mean, I was really struck. There's a report that's just come out. It's called How Gen Z Discover and Consume Books. And so this came out in July by Kathy Behrens and Rachel Norder. And they found that, I think it was between 2022 and 2025, the proportion of Gen Z who identified as readers had gone up by 14 percentage points.
Whoa.
Which is a lot. That is a lot. But I do think there's a risk of the wrong comparison with vinyl. I think there is something really lovely about listening to vinyl records, particularly the depth of sound and, something you only really get from it, the needle scratching the surface. And that is all lovely. And it's nice to collect vinyls. They look good. But there are some fundamental physics issues with books and printed matter that can't really be overcome by the internet. Over time, humans' eyes and the length of their arms haven't really evolved in the entire time that humans have been on this planet. And so if you are picking up a book or picking up a newspaper or picking up a magazine, it remains the best way to absorb information. And I think that when we see the statistics of Gen Z deciding to read more books, magazines, and anything else, it's because that's an inescapable fact. If you were to ask a newspaper or magazine to print its size, the exact same size as an iPhone screen, and you had a really, really tall stack of bits of paper, you wouldn't sit there and think that was a really good way to get information or enjoy the issue. Like, you would never do that. Nobody would ever print it that size. And we didn't have newspapers that were broadsheet format because of some sort of technical limitation. Pamphlets existed before that, and it was just decided that this is quite a good way of consuming information. So I think, and I hope, that younger readers are just realizing that this is a much nicer, much less stressful experience when you take out the rest of everything else that you'll be shown if you're trying to do anything on the internet. If you're reading even a Kindle on your phone or anything like that, it just takes one notification to take you out again and take you to something else. And in fact, a lot of apps are designed like that.
You're only using one sense. When you read digitally, it's only your visual sense that's stimulated. When you pick up something that's made of paper, your olfactory sense is triggered immediately. There's a smell of paper. There's a smell of a freshly printed magazine. There's the sensation of touch. There's the audio sensations
Inky
as well.
fingers.
It rustles. The inky fingers. The taste back in the days when we used to eat our fish and chips out of poisonous inky papers.
Or when you licked your finger to turn the page over.
Oh, yes.
A lot of your reference points are un-British. So you've already mentioned the Tokyo train transport jingles. There is a special report on Vienna and their social housing program. So I wanted to ask you whether Paperweight is actually an argument against British insularity. Are there things that we're stubbornly refusing to learn from elsewhere?
Well, to an extent, a lot of the examples for what we might want to do will come from other places, and certainly other places in Europe, across the world. I think that there are some aspects of British society or the way that our public services are run that are uniquely not very good for what is purportedly a very wealthy country. More simply, when I decided to set up Paperweight, I was very much looking at another country's example, because I was struck by, when I was sat at Gare de Lyon train station with a cup of tea, waiting for a train, how almost everybody else in the same cafe wasn't looking at their phone and was looking at either a book or a newspaper or a magazine. And if you compare the number of magazine racks and newspaper racks in France to that in the UK, I mean, we barely have any anymore. It's amazing how much more online the UK is specifically. Some of that comes from the fact that we share a language with the Americans, where lots of the tech companies have used the UK as a bit of a petri dish to test out tech that makes things more addictive or keeps people engaged. So, yeah, I mean, throughout all of this is a very British magazine for British readers. But arguably, you're right, borrowing ideas from the rest of the world where things are done a little bit better.
Quiet, Riot. This podcast is supported by Anthropic, the public benefit corporation behind Claude. Everyone's got a hard question about AI. Your job, your kids, where it's going. Anthropic was built to surface those questions and share what it finds along the way, because there's hope in hard questions. Ask yours at claude.ai/Spotify and keep thinking. That's claude.ai/Spotify.
I've been in this library for 6 hours. I'm out of snacks and energy. Plus, I just realized I forgot to put deodorant on.
Oh, girl, you're a mess. Let's run to Target.
Let's RTT.
We'll grab some protein chips, body spray, and deodorant.
And we get 20% off with Target Circle, so we can get those great face masks for our self-care Sundays.
I love an SCS.
Let's get out of here.
College students get 20% off their next purchase with Target Circle. Subject to terms. Visit target.com/circle for more details.
Quiet, Riot.
I don't think it should be about making things hard. You know how sometimes with cooking people say, "No, this is no, this is really difficult, and these are the parts that are difficult, and this is where everyone could go wrong." And I feel like, why introduce this note of stress before you start? Because actually, this is how it can all go right. You just stir things together in a saucepan and put them in the oven, and that's cooking. So I think that there's no need to do things that are very complicated, and nor should home cooking really be like shop bought or from a restaurant. You're not, perfection is not really the aim. Well, for me, it isn't anyway. Perfection is not something you can aim for because it cripples you and it makes you feel too daunted. But that's not to say that I'm not obsessive. When I write a recipe, I go over and over and over to get it as good as I can and as simple as I can and to make it as clear as I can. So in that sense, you could say I'm a perfectionist. But I also, when I cook, I realise that there's a flow and the kitchen has its own dynamic and things will turn out as they do.
Cal, there's a real Epicurean streak here, and I applaud it, especially the non-sourdough bread recipe. It does Keir recipe test, by the way.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, honestly, I think Keir ends up making things at least 15, 20 times before they end up. Oh, God,
Keir is Cal's partner, listeners, not the former Prime Minister.
No, that is the sort of obsessiveness I can approve of.
But if you know anybody who's a particularly famous chef or cook who wants to write a recipe for Paperweight magazine, of course, we are always welcome to new contributors, Alex.
I mean, look, what I was going to say was that for many people, the Michelin set lunch under £30 actually is a luxury rather than a bargain. So as a more general question, how do we make living well, which is the Epicurean philosophy, isn't it? The Epicurean philosophy is that the highest value good one can create in any society is happiness, which means that living well is essential. So how do we make living well accessible and inclusive to everyone rather than put it behind a paywall?
It's certainly very difficult. I mean, there's always an aspirational aspect of any magazine. I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted to make Paperweight have so many more affordable, and I admit not entirely affordable, more affordable things to do was that when I look at certain magazines, I mean, for instance, in the FT Weekend, the How to Spend It magazine is great. I love reading it. But I mean, I can't afford it to go to any of the hotels that are featured in it. I certainly can't. I couldn't even afford one of the coffee tables or the ornament on it in any of the photography features. But I do still really enjoy looking at those and still enjoy reading those. But when, I look at other lifestyle magazines too, and I sat there and I thought, I am really loving looking at these. This is great. But actually, I think there might be a gap in the market for a magazine that is selecting slightly more affordable, slightly lower price point things to do. Now, it's certainly true. Not all of the things that will feature in Paperweight are going to be particularly affordable, but they're certainly a lot more affordable than the lifestyle magazines that I suppose are targeting themselves at a slightly older reader. I think that there is a little bit of a gap for this kind of lifestyle magazine for millennials. There's certainly lots of magazines that are springing up that are definitely for this age group. I mean, I think between 2021 and 2024, independent magazine sales rose by about 14%, and a really large chunk of those are people, were founded by people in their late 20s, early 30s. But they've got some very specific niches, and actually there was a real gap in the market for a lifestyle magazine that will give you some recipes, perhaps a nice restaurant that you could think about going to for a special occasion, a hotel or holiday that maybe you can afford right now, or something you might afford in the future. So I think it was already a lot more affordable than certainly the magazines that I came across and enjoyed reading. But you're right, it is difficult. We're not going to be too prescriptive about the price point at which we decide to cover things.
If we're talking money then, I suppose this is tangentially related to what you've just been discussing. How do you, as the founder of Paperweight, navigate that ever-present tension at the heart of that debate between paywalling your content versus the desire to broaden public debate and to drag topics like politics into enjoyable spaces? I mean, would you rather build a movement or a members club, or, are you just wanting to pay the sodding bills?
It's a really difficult one. And in some ways, I think it needs to be taken on a bit of a case-by-case basis, depending on what the content is or the story is. I do think that there has been a little bit of a shift in people's how prepared people are to pay for quality content that they enjoy.
Yeah.
Largely driven by the fact that free content is getting worse and worse and less enjoyable. I used to enjoy spending time on Twitter back when it was Twitter. Now I don't. Most people don't. And so when people come across something that they do enjoy, they are more willing to pay for it. And not every article on Paperweight will have a paywall. Lots of it is just we ask you for an email address. We do that for one very important reason, by the way. And I think a lot of organizations have become very reliant on a particular platform. Were reliant on all of their revenue and all of their readership from one Instagram account.
That's true.
Meta decided to suspend it. So for a lot of the content, we ask that you've signed up just as a free member, just so that we have that direct connection with you. You can always write to us. We can always write to you. No tech company can stand in the way of that. But there is going to be a need to put some of the content behind a paywall, not a particularly expensive one, but there's a benefit to that too, because I hope that Paperweight will become a community of people who are quite like-minded, and eventually that will lead to us being able to do in-person events and other activity that will bring the contributors and the readers together to start thinking about how we might make some of these ideas happen.
I would definitely pay to join a Paperweight book club.
Okay. Oh, that's noted. I was more tailoring the magazine to Naomi. I'll just add it to my list of things Naomi would quite like, and we'll stick it in.
We've talked about this a little bit, Cal, that the right wing is much better at sort of smuggling ideology into enjoyable spaces like the fitness influencer or the buy-to-let show or whatever, while the left quarantines politics into slightly drier, more serious rooms. Can the left, do you think, actually employ the right's playbook? Or does it need to find its own approach because there's a sort of earnestness baked into being worried about the world around you and wanting to make things better?
It's difficult to say. And a lot of the success that the right has had has been closely connected with the media environment in which it's operated in and sort of capitalized on. Now, it's really up for debate whether the left needs to fight back in exactly the same way or do something completely different. I mean, I do think it's striking just how popular for now Andy Burnham is on the internet and how successfully some of that common strategy is beginning to work. And I mean, huge kudos to the people behind a lot of that. That's great. But let's see how long it lasts. And I do think that if we are operating in a media environment that rewards outrage and frustration and anger and hate, there is a limit to how successfully we can win that battle with nice ideas about being a bit kinder and making life or the economy a bit more equal for all. And we certainly shouldn't choose to fight those battles that can't be won. And I think this is part of the reason that I wanted to start a magazine, actually, is it because I feel that change is coming. I think that a lot of people are realizing, the spaces that I've spent a lot of my evening scrolling through on my phone are not really where I want to be. And people are looking for alternatives. And it would be really nice if the left, the progressives, centre-left, was ready to go, armed, and able to win on that battlefield.
Yeah.
Well, there is a battlefield that has to be won, and that is against the enshittification of the internet. And you lean on Dr. Ov's idea around all of that. And I know that Paperweight is online only at the moment, but it obviously does have this ambition to be in print, and you are basically pitching print as the refuge to a lot of that enshittified online content. What will stop the same forces coming for print, do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I think that while there are lots of magazines starting up at the moment, it'll be interesting to see what happens once that market settles down a little bit. But people's sort of consumption habits have been permanently changed by the internet. Rather than wanting big brands, single brands that everybody is really interested in, people quite like to have their sort of slightly more, their personal choices. And so I think that the market for magazines is now much bigger, for a greater number of magazines is much bigger than it has been before. There is a limit to how much control tech companies can have once you start building up a readership who recommend it to a friend. I think a lot of the best things are spread by word of mouth, and we've got really used to having to use social media and paid social media to try to spread a message. So you're right. I mean, the main reason that Paperweight isn't print immediately is just because, first of all, I didn't have huge amounts of cash to invest to start it up. But secondly, the internet did provide a little bit of an opportunity to test which topics and which sort of things people are most interested in. So that, there's certainly a benefit to that. But I do want this to be a print first magazine. And so everything will break first in the print edition and then end up on Instagram and other bits of the internet after that print edition has come out. And I think that's the best protection against outside forces that we've possibly got. And it also indicates to everybody that you're being led by what will make a really good, enjoyable read for the reader, rather than making those decisions based on how many times you think that will be shared online. I hope that is a little bit more robust. It was certainly more robust before we had the internet, and I hope that it will be, in the future.
As somebody who's been there, then, does that mean, Cal, that the print product's going to be expected to wash its own face? Or is there an inevitability that the digital edition is going to be doing a bit of cross-subsidizing and financial heavy lifting for the print product, making the print product much more of a luxury experience, I suppose?
I do think that people are they like to have something to hold in their hand. And arguably, the kind of people who will enjoy the content in Paperweight are probably going to be the kind of people who like to hold a magazine in their hand. Making the magazine is going to require, we need a few more subscribers before we decide to actually kickstart the print product. But the growth that we've had just in the short 5 weeks has been much bigger than I anticipated. So when I was sitting down going, right, okay, how many subscribers might we need to find online? How many people would we need to do this? Blah, blah, blah. Paperweight's already surpassed those expectations. Right. So I'm confident that actually, once you start to combine the print magazine with in-person or online events and a variety of other things, we're also hoping to bring people offers that make some of those nicer things to do a little bit more affordable in towns and cities across the UK, not just your big brands. So local restaurants and places, so that your membership of Paperweight actually gets you not just a print magazine in your hand, but lots of other practical ways and to live your life a bit greater and a little bit cheaper too.
Final question, Cal. Has it been mostly hard work and frustration or mostly enjoyable so far?
It's really been enjoyable. But then my first job was in magazines. While I was at sixth form college, I got a job. I definitely wasn't meant to work there. And I was working at the Gay Times magazine, which had a lot of adult content in the back that I was just told not to really look at. And so I started my career. In magazines. And so
you didn't. You definitely didn't.
I didn't look at that at all. No. But I went, knowing that was such a long time ago. That was, it was 2006. I thought, okay, right, well, I'm going to really have to brush up. A lot will have changed. What do I need to know? What's different and anything else? So I went to some really good events organised by the very, very supportive magazine community. So the International Magazine Centre in Glasgow, the British Society of Magazine Editors. And although lots has changed, I was struck by the fact that a lot of the company's distribution and the printing were the same ones from 20 years ago. And so I thought, gosh, okay, well, maybe I know a little bit more about this than I thought I did. And so that's been quite nice to go back to doing something that I do know a little bit about, but bring lots of the experience that I've got from doing more political stuff and political communications, bringing those together. So no, it's been entirely enjoyable. I really love talking to people about this. What I particularly like is just how much people say, oh gosh, no, I think this is something that we do need. They recognise that frustration and feeling of despair that's too prevalent in Britain and certainly don't want it to continue and want things to get better. So it's lovely to talk to people about that. And it's really nice to have conversations about what sort of things people would like to write about. I'm very excited to share them with everyone.
Well, let's talk about how people can get hold of the magazine. Listeners, if you want to know where you can get a set lunch for under 30 quid at a Michelin restaurant, if you want to know walking routes that you can get to at the weekend, if you want reviews of the latest electric vehicles, how should they sign up? How do they find Paperweight? Where are you on social media?
So the first thing to say is that every Sunday there's a newsletter called Sunday Paperweight, which is completely free. It's very easy to sign up to. Just go to paperweightmag.com. It's got all of the listings on major cities across the UK, interesting things that are going on, as well as a roundup of some of the articles that we've published. And we're hoping that grows into something that people really look forward to reading. So that's paperweightmag.com. But also, if you want to help us become a print product, ideally at the beginning of 2027, but maybe even sooner, then subscribe. You can also find us on Instagram, which is at paperweight.mag. we're not doing any other social media because we're hoping to tell everybody why they should get off social media. So we think that Instagram is the only one that we should be on. So
Fantastic.
we'd love to connect with you on the actual website. And if you have ideas of things you want to contribute, there's details of submitting as well.
And so, listeners, your call to action this week is to subscribe to Paperweight magazine. But brilliantly, we have got a 50% discount code exclusively for Quiet Riot listeners. So head on down to the show notes. You'll find a link that will give you monthly membership for £2 a month rather than £4 a month for the first few months. And we'll also leave a link to Paperweight's Instagram account.
Quiet Riot. And now it's time for us to go back into our post bag and read out some of the pretty petty local issues that you've sent in to us off the back of last week's Sunday school. And there was one topic above all that got you riled. Roads. Well, roads and pavements. So, Naomi, you kick us off.
Well, this is from Martin, who contacted us on Blue Sky. And he says, my pet peeve in my village is people who block pavements, whether it's cars, work vans, delivery vans, bins or skips, or in London, certainly line bikes, parking with their wheels on the pavement, leaving so little room that you cannot get by without going into the road. That makes life difficult and dangerous for vulnerable people. And I'd add people with pushchairs and things like that too. So it's parents as well, people in wheelchairs. Martin, I could not agree with you more. I've got family members who use wheelchairs. I've got family members that are just a bit doddery on their feet and find it very difficult to circumnavigate an obstacle that should not be blocking the pavement. So no, we're with you on that one, and the councils need to get on it much more quickly to make sure that everybody can safely get by. Kenny, I think you've got one for us as well.
I've got another one from Eulalia, who contacted us on Blue Sky as well. And Eulalia says, I find massively depressing all the rubbish that's scattered up and down Britain's A roads. It's astonishing. The A1, says Eulalia, for example, is littered with tyres and dead animals, cups, plastic sheeting, bodies and bodies? Bottles. I thought we'd stumbled onto a fabulous story there. A1 Murdo capital of the world.
Next season on Line of Duty.
There's been a murder. Eulalia says it suggests we've lost all pride in ourselves. It is. I mean, it's just, as councils' budgets have been cut again and again and again, the number of places where you can actually put rubbish has declined. So there's a push and a pull factor here. But I'm with you completely, Eulalia. There's something just deeply depressing about driving along a road of any sort. It's not good enough. Alex, what have you got?
So Norbert sent an email to us, and he says that my story about the petrol station across the road using a loudspeaker in the middle of the night prompted him. For him, it's a Transport for London thing, because he lives right by the Custom House Elizabeth line station, presumably because the station was built due to Excel, but it has quite a low capacity. Anytime there's a modest-sized event, basically someone comes out with a loudspeaker and starts shouting at people for hours to stand behind the yellow line and move along the platform. Stand back, stand back, stand back, stand back. The next train is the service to Abbey Wood, etc., etc. And he says, for people living in the area, this can be quite disturbing. And he reminded me of something that happens in Greece that maybe we want to introduce here. So in Greece, we have what's known as ώρες κοινής ησυχίας, which literally translates as hours of collective hush. And this is set by the state. And this won't apply to the UK because you don't really do siestas. But in Greece, it's between 3 and 5:30 in the afternoon, and then between 11 at night and 7 the next morning, later on a Sunday. And during those hours, no courier will ring your buzzer, no one will play music outside, people are careful about tooting their horns. It's just respected because it's fixed. There is no argument to say, oh, come on, it's a Friday night, it's only 11:30 or whatever. It's fixed. And so it gives people a fixed window of time.
And is it policed by society?
Yeah, but like I said, because you go to your neighbor, sorry, but you can't make noise. It's the hours of collective hush. And everyone kind of respects it because they know that's the rule. And it seems to me that a lot of the misunderstanding and thoughtlessness that goes on is because there is discretion in the system and you want to say, well, what's late? What's late for a 17-year-old might not be the same thing that's late for a 70-year-old. By setting out these minimum hours where builders know that they can't start drilling or digging up the road, it makes everything a lot easier, and that costs nothing, and it might be something that we want to think about.
Does that ban loud sex as well?
Why must you
Every
always
time.
drag
Every time.
everything
I mean,
down?
at the risk of making myself very unpopular with Alex and very unpopular in Greece by the sound of it, I do think that attempts to make bits of certainly town centres and city centres in the UK quieter should be avoided, just because the number of pubs that are having to close or not have their outdoor area because people have moved in.
No
and have started
vertical
complaining.
drinking in Soho, Callum.
I'm afraid I'm a bit of a pro-noise person, but in the right place. When you've got pubs that have been open for 400 years being closed down because of a complaint about laughter next door, that does seem a little bit mean-spirited. And
I don't know if you've been to Greece. It's not a quiet place.
No, I agree.
So I would doubt the premise of your question that this is about making everything quieter. Actually, having clear rules makes people more able to express themselves, because they also know that inside those hours, you can't say a thing to them if they're playing loud music or whatever. So,
I agree with that. I think that is a really good idea, and definitely giving the sort of a shared culture of when is and isn't appropriate is probably very healthy.
Nikki emailed us with another bugbear, and it's one that has got a very, very significant safety implication to it. She says, my local bugbear, I live half a mile away from a 3-lane motorway roundabout and use it most days. In recent months, the line markings have become so faint they're impossible to see. Nobody is in the right lane. There are regular prangs. I was a few cars behind one the other day, and it makes me rage. Not with the other drivers, I should say. If they're new to the roundabout, they'd have no clue. But surely the council can get the paint out. The most frustrating thing about it is that I live in the neighbouring council and constituency, so I can't message anyone who represents me. And then she says, thank you for letting me vent. It was this or the local Facebook group, and I'll be damned if I'll become a local keyboard warrior. Laugh emoji. Well done, Nikki. But no, it's true. I see it more and more often now, extremely faded lines. And then to really catch you out, there's a fucking camera on the traffic light above that will catch you out for rolling over the very faint line that you didn't know was there when the lights turn red.
No exaggeration. When I leave my house, there is a cycle lane that usually has a taxi or an Uber or just another unwitting driver accidentally finding themselves in it, because it's impossible to see that when that is a cycle lane, not a bit of road. And I dread to think how many people have been caught out by it if I'm seeing it sort of half the time I leave the house.
There's many, many more, but that's all we have time for today. So that's the end of today's B-Side show. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in, and a heavy, heavy paper-weighted thanks to Cal Roscow, and the best of luck with the magazine.
Thank you very much for having me on.
And as ever, if you can help support our show, even though we are very definitely not a paper-based product, then do head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod, where you can help us pay the bills for $5 a month or a few quid more if you're that way inclined.
We'll be back on Sunday with our wrap up of the week that was. So until then, have a wonderful end to your week. And don't forget to keep on rioting. Just do it. For the love of all things Greek siesta, quietly.
We love you all more than the collective hours of hush. Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production from Cooler Heads, written and produced by Andreou, Naomi Smith, and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu, and edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot. I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
The right window treatments change everything. Your sleep, your privacy, the way every room looks and feels. At Blinds.com, we've spent 30 years making it surprisingly simple to get exactly what your home needs. We've covered over 25 million windows and have 50,000 5-star reviews to prove we deliver. Whether you DIY it or want a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we have you covered. Real design professionals, free samples, zero pressure. Right now, get up to 45% off site-wide, plus get a free professional measure at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.